Hey everybody, it's Jenna. I'm back today to break down one of the biggest pieces of comic news, if not the biggest, to drop this year. During this year's Comics Pro convention, DC Editor-in-Chief Marie Javins and Marvel Editor-in-Chief C.B. Cebulski announced that the two companies will be crossing over for the first time in over 2 decades. This will happen in 2 one-shot comics that will be released later this year, DC/Marvel, published by DC, and Marvel/DC, published by Marvel, with further details being revealed at a later date. I cannot overstate how exciting this is and how huge this is for this year in comics, as the industry continues to rebuild and evolve, especially after COVID. It also continues a very fun and very bizarre history of these two universes crossing over in ways both big and very small. By the end of the Silver Age, as both DC and Marvel had begun to really establish successful superhero rosters, there were attempts to play off of each other without crossing any sort of legal lines. Legend has it that in the late 1960s, writer Mike Frederick dared Avengers writer Roy Thomas and Justice League of America writer Denny O'Neil to homage the other company's super team without their editors noticing. Thomas fulfilled his end of the bargain with his and Sal Buscema's Avengers 70, an issue introducing the supervillain team, the Squadron Sinister, who were very clearly send-ups to Superman, the Flash, Batman, and Green Lantern. This concept eventually morphed into the superhero team, the Squadron Supreme, who carved out their own corner of the Marvel canon and led to one of my favorite comic runs of all time. O'Neill's answer was a little bit more esoteric. In his and Mike Sekowsky's Justice League of America 75, which is now retroactively regarded to be the first appearance of the second Black Canary, the JLA fight ghostly doppelgangers of themselves known as Destructors, who happen to say slogans or brandish props that are similar to the Avengers. A few years later, in the fall of 1972, another crossover was essentially published in plain sight. Thor number 207, Justice League of America number 103, and Amazing Adventures number 16 all have storylines involving the Rutland, Vermont Halloween Parade, a real-life parade that often features comic characters. Characters from the other companies can be seen in the background of each other's books, and the 3 issues weave a very meta-narrative where the book's writers, Jerry Conway, Steve Englehart, Len Wein, and his wife and colorist Glynis Wein, visit the parade and encounter various heroes and villains. By the mid-1970s, the crossovers began in earnest. After partnering together on an officially licensed adaptation of The Wizard of Oz in 1975, the companies joined forces with 1976's Superman vs. the Amazing Spider-Man. Written by Conway with art by Ross Andru, Neil Adams, and John Romita Sr., it sees the two characters existing in the same universe, which we'll talk about more in a bit, and joining forces to fight Lex Luthor and Doc Ock. Its success spawned a sequel, 1981's Superman and Spider-Man, which folded in even more characters from both companies. Batman vs. the Incredible Hulk arrived a few months later, as did the Uncanny X-Men and the New Teen Titans. At the time, there was nothing saying that the Marvel and DC canons couldn't coexist in the same universe. After all, DC's Justice Society got its origins from the characters of 2 separate companies, National and All-American. But once DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths and Marvel's Secret Wars happened in the mid-80s, it was basically all but inferred that the two were separate. These intercompany crossovers were basically put on ice for over a decade, starting up again in 1994 with one-offs between Batman and the Punisher, Batman and Spider-Man, Darkseid and Galactus, and Green Lantern and Silver Surfer. Then came the massive year-spanning event dubbed DC vs. Marvel. The event had 2 goals: to give both Marvel and DC a marketing boost after the rise of independent comics and publishers had begun to challenge their market share, and to answer the age-old question of who would win in a fight between certain characters. The event introduced the Brothers, 2 omnipotent warriors who personify the Marvel and DC universes and who throw pairings of Marvel and DC heroes into 1v1 battles. The outcomes of some of these fights were plotted in advance, while 5 of them were voted on by fans, with Marvel ultimately winning 6-5. Originally, the Brothers wanted to erase the losing universe out of existence, but the Spectre and the Living Tribunal came up with an alternative: a new universe mashing both canons together, conveniently named the Amalgam Universe. Marvel and DC took the initiative even further, retroactively establishing a fake history of amalgam events that had supposedly happened since the Golden Age, complete with fake lore and fake letter columns, a precursor in a way to my video on Sentry. Only a handful of characters would know the truth about the Amalgam Universe, including Axel Asher, aka Access, a superhero co-owned by both publishers and a self-described hall monitor of both universes. Without getting too far into spoilers, because you owe it to yourself to read the event, Access works with the Amalgamed heroes to get the brothers to see the error of their ways, and both universes are ultimately separated again. There were plans for DC and Marvel to swap 2 characters for a year once the dust had settled from this event, with She-Hulk and Martian Manhunter being suggested as options, but that did not come to fruition. Ron Mars, who served as one of the writers on DC vs. Marvel, later explained that, quote, "It felt like those were great picks because at least in terms of power sets, they're kind of redundant characters. She-Hulk is, well, a Lady Hulk, and Martian Manhunter is pretty close to Superman, just green with a big brow. They both would have seemed more original in the opposite universes." As a She-Hulk fan, I absolutely mourn this because I think it would have been such a clever escalation of her meta energy from the sensational She-Hulk era, and I would have died seeing all of her dynamics with all of the DC characters. I also think Jean would have been a cool choice for Marvel as well, especially when juxtaposed with the Avengers and the X-Men and how they were operating at the time. But hey, at least we always have fanfiction. Outside of 1999's Superman Fantastic Four one-shot, the next big crossover arrived a decade later with Kurt Busiek and George Perez's JLA Avengers. Published in 2003 and 2004, the 4-issue miniseries essentially tried to retcon the DC vs. Marvel and Amalgam era, arguing that this was the first time the Avengers and the Justice League had ever met. It's a story that turns turns into a sort of cosmic scavenger hunt as the teams track down various MacGuffins from their universes to stop them from being destroyed. This crossover has become beloved in the decades since, both for the interplay between the various characters and for seeing Perez's glorious approach to character design and style in both his Marvel and DC work on the same exact panel. In the years since, any crossover between Marvel and DC has gone back to being hidden in plain sight, like the amalgam version of Spider-Man and Superboy returning in 2015 Spider-Verse, and the Daily Planet and the Justice League cameoing in Thor. There have been plenty of references to the other publishers' characters both in comics and in adaptations.
Bunch of superheroes in a farmhouse? I feel like I've seen that in a movie before.
Dad, that's Superman!
But nothing close to the heyday of the previous events. DC's Doomsday Clock did tease a Secret Crisis crossover event in 2030 where Superman hypothetically meets Thor and the Hulk, and it'll be interesting to see if that ever actually comes to fruition. Even beyond the self-imposed cultural boundaries of the DC-Marvel rivalry, which I've been meaning to do an entire separate video about because I feel like there are some frustrating misconceptions about it, it is still kind of a miracle that these two new one-shots are happening. The amount of legal logistics and creative back and forth that have to go into a project like this are massive. It already felt monumental for both companies to work together on the Hero Initiative reprint of JLA Avengers in 2022, which honored Perez in the months before his passing. It also felt monumental to have the DC Marvel and Amalgam Age omnibuses reprinted last year, and it seems based on Javin's and Cebulski's comments that the overwhelming response to these reprints led to this new crossover. Even though we still know so little, the fact that it's even happening is just exciting. I'm curious exactly what the narrative of it will entail, especially when we only have 2 one-shots of real estate as opposed to a massive event or even a multiple issue miniseries. There are countless character interactions I would have loved to have seen in a full-blown event, but it feels like whatever story we do get will need to be somewhat self-contained. Of course, any combination of Superman and the Fantastic Four feels like it could be a slam dunk, especially after this summer, and my fiance suggested a theory which other people have started to echo online, and I'm starting to wonder about myself. What if it's a crossover between DC's Absolute and Marvel's Ultimate universes as opposed to their main lines? Both are breaking sales records and providing an entry point for people to dive into comics, as I dove into in my video about the Absolute universe last fall, so it would cast a wider net of potential readers. And both universes are rooted in a story about a fascist villain reshaping reality to be at a disadvantage, with Darkseid in the Absolute universe and the Maker in the Ultimate universe. Even then, both are so fundamentally different from each other and have such strong personalities and status quos for their characters that it would provide endless narrative potential to see the two of them interact. It also feels like it would be such a small blip in the storytelling plans for both universes that they could just keep trucking along afterwards anyway. Are you excited for the Marvel DC crossover? Do you have any theories or hopes for these 2 one-shots? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you haven't already done so. Merch is available at the link in the description. As always, you can find me on social media at Hey It's Jenna Lynn. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, go read some comics.